So remember, this week's episode, you start off with the Bevafan Nagin, move on to the Rock, and then you close off with the Bihar Return. So are we rolling or not? Are we ready? Oh, so okay, fine. So hi there. Welcome to the second episode of Coffee Time Gyan. So as you know, I'm Vivek and this is my co-host Aditya. And on this entire podcast, we talk about various different topics around the world and with special focus in India while we sip our coffees. So hey everybody, welcome to the second episode of Coffee Time Gyan. So in this week's episode, we'll be covering three big topics. Firstly, we'll be looking at Apple's succession plan for Tim Cook. Second of all, we'll be looking at the Google versus Paytm debate that is going on, with Paytm being taken off from the Google Play Store this early Friday morning, only to return back a few hours later. And thirdly, we'll be taking a look at the Zhenhua Data leak, in which the data of around 10,000 Indian citizens were being monitored by this Chinese company called Zenhua. But before we begin with all of that, let me pass it on to my co-host Aditya, who will be speaking about some comical bits of news from this week.
Before we go into that, I'm surprised that Vivek did not notice that how seriously I've taken up the constructive criticism point that he raised in the last episode.
But that's the beauty of it, no? I don't need technology for him to make that change.
So this week's comic bit is somewhat of a carry forward from last week's, that is the death of media. Today's topic that I wanted to go over is that of Bewafa Nagin.
Okay.
So let me enlighten you with the story. So it's about this Nagin who has a very hard time choosing a partner for herself between two very competent Nags. So that is what the media is covering these days, and I wanted to just bring it up.
I would personally think that with COVID, the ongoing thing with Riya Chakraborty and everything, the news and the media would have something better to cover than Bewafa Nagins in general, right? But there's nothing we can do.
That is why it's the death of media.
Yeah.
Right? That is exactly why it's the death of media.
Unfortunate.
And also, did you like the second bit of news that was not humorous exactly though, because it's more, I don't know, macho, I guess.
Okay.
Like, did you hear about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson?
Yeah, he got so pissed he actually just tore apart his electric gate and tossed it.
Yeah.
Why?
Only he can. Because he can. Sometimes people do things because they can.
True.
So, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
So, in the context of tearing things apart, did you hear about that bridge in Bihar which just broke off and floated away?
And is it like a couple of days back or something?
Yeah. So, let me give you the gist of it. There was this bridge somewhere in Bihar, right? It was supposed to be inaugurated rather, and it was completed before the completion date. And a few days before the inauguration, the bridge just decided to, break off and float away.
Okay, so that's great. We know that what we can expect from Indian roads these days then. So moving on, we should, I think, go into the heavier topics, I guess, that we were going to discuss today.
Sure. Let's do that then and begin with our very first topic.
Absolutely. So Apple is vigorously looking for a new CEO to replace Tim Cook, and
so who has been there. So why do you think Tim Cook has been in that position for over the last 10 years, if I'm not too wrong?
Correct. I guess competency.
Yeah. So but why? Because company that is as big as Apple, right? By market capitalization, the first probably. So my question would be is why now? Because I know a couple of things that Johnny Ive, their head designer, they left recently to start his own company. He's still there with Apple, but with his own firm. Also, if I'm not too wrong, their head of marketing probably Phil Schiller. He's also went off to another role within Apple, but he's moved on from a primary facing role to a secondary role. Do you think that could be the reason why Apple decided to take this angle and to protect itself, rather the company, for the purpose of their own continued existence, decide to now of all times look for a succession plan for Tim Cook, although he's been in that position for the last 10 years?
I believe the entire debate that is being kind of debated on here is basically that whether or not somebody from outside can maintain such a huge company, or whether somebody from inside should progress like what Tim Cook did. Like Tim Cook was there when Apple was, and he was doing most of the work with regards to designs and with regards to products, even when Steve Jobs was there.
Agreed.
So right now, I would suggest that as a company, you have worked with a lot of startups. Now, this is not a startup.
Correct. We are talking about the biggest company.
$1 trillion company.
Correct.
So the onus that the CEO would have on himself to act and be competent, the level at which we will expect, and not only that, it will also have to have the person will have to have the same ideals as that of the previous predecessor.
So in that regard, so me personally, I would prefer that somebody from the inside, just like Tim Cook,
Yeah.
or if you look at Microsoft, for example,
Yeah.
like Satya Nadella, who was already an existing employee, or Sundar Pichai from
Yeah.
Google, who was an existing employee, correct? I personally would prefer that whoever be that replaces Tim Cook, right, if he chooses to leave like Johnny Ive and Phil Schiller, be somebody who's already there at Apple, right? And instead, Apple go outside and look for somebody who would embody the Apple ideals, let's say,
Exactly.
right, and inculcate that into the company, because you would agree that there are pros and cons to hiring from outside as well.
Absolutely.
Right. So you, I believe, are on the side where you would agree that getting somebody from the outside would be a better idea.
At this point of time, after you break it down like this, I would rather say that when it's $1 trillion company, right, then it is not exactly beneficial for the company to hire from outside.
Correct.
Because it might have those simple discrepancy even with regards to ideas or ideologies when he's running the company, or he or she is running the company for that matter.
Correct. So we see the CEO is the person who is the face of the company, who is the one who is driving the company forward, right?
Exactly.
And considering Apple, right, and how they value their principles and everything and all, I personally believe that they should get somebody from the inside. Like personally, if you ask me, my front runner for that would be this guy called Craig Federighi.
Yeah.
He's been on the Apple keynotes and the Apple launches and everything, right, for the last couple of years. And he's also, if I'm not wrong, the senior vice president of software design. Software
designs, yeah.
So he has this hand, he is a known face, right, within the company. And I personally feel that he would be a good fit for the next CEO should Tim Cook choose to leave or move to other roles within the company, right?
Yeah.
But personally, what do you feel? Do you feel he's a good fit?
If I am allowed, I would like to segregate this debate a little more. As in, let's explore the other side as well. That is, if there is somebody that is being hired from outside to represent a company, right? So, in a situation like that, it is suitable, say, when we are working with a smaller group of people, and this person who can come into this company can promote or per se work with the company in such a way to get them traction or get them certain things that they want per se with their mission or their goals.
So when you say come in, do you mean somebody from the outside?
For somebody from the outside.
So you're talking about somebody new, somebody fresh, somebody who is not been associated with Apple all this while.
I'm not talking about Apple here. Essentially what I'm saying is like, say there is a company, leave alone Apple. When we're talking about Apple, it's a different bar altogether because it's $1 trillion company.
Correct. That's precisely why I'm pushing upon you that it be somebody from the inside and preferably Craig Federighi.
I am all for somebody from the inside. I am not very aware of Craig as a visionary per se, because whoever does come to kind of represent Apple for the next few years or the next decade has to be somebody who embodies the vision and maintains that continuum to reach there. What Steve Jobs or Wozniak started.
Absolutely.
So that entire vision has to be very intact.
Absolutely.
Now, for a company who has their vision very well in place, ideas very well in place, I don't think there is anything that a outside CEO can join in and actually contribute to it. There's not much he would be able to contribute to the vision or the ideals or anything of that sort. So he'll be essentially running the company, and a company which he essentially might not believe in.
Agreed. But having said that, I would still lean on, agreed with all your points for any general company, right? My point, or rather what I would harp on still is, considering it's Apple, it be somebody from the inside. Or anybody.
Absolutely. I completely concur with that because, as I said, it's $1 trillion company, and the onus that would be there on the CEO would be too huge. And that is not something a person can just walk into.
Absolutely. So
you can just waltz into the
We agree
office,
with this that,
Yeah, we do.
Ideally, for any company, an outside infusion sounds good, but considering Apple in mind, and the Apple in mind, somebody from the inside is
Absolutely.
Great. So coming to our second bit of news that we're covering in this week's episode.
Yeah.
So you probably would have heard about it in the news. The Paytm app that is there on the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store was for a brief period of time. So like 7-8 hours, right? It was taken off the Google Play Store and then it mysteriously appeared back once again. So there's a lot of speculation on that as to why this happened, right? All of a sudden the Paytm app, and mind you, only the Paytm app, the Paytm business app, the Paytm mobile app, the Paytm even app on the App Store, that wasn't affected. Only the Google Play Store was affected. So it raised a lot of questions, right, as to why this happened. So I digged a little further deep into this and found out why. The reason why the Paytm app was taken off from the Google Play Store was Google claimed that Paytm had violated Google's gambling policies that is there after repeated requests and intimation by Google's dev team to the Paytm team, right, that certain bits of your app, in particularly to this context, there's this IPL mini game. The Indian Premier League, as you know, has started from the 17th, right? This mini game that was put in by Paytm within the Paytm app, it essentially allowed people to, participate by selecting their own favorite players, right, through the matches that were happening in the IPL during that day or in the coming days, right?
Yeah.
And if they picked the right players, right, they would get stickers which they could later on encash for actual currency. Now, that constitutes a part of gambling, wouldn't you agree? Because
to some extent, there's an element of contingency there. So that can be considered as like that part.
It is like it's pseudo gambling. It's not gambling per se, but it is
gambling.
because you are essentially picking players, right, who you think have a good chance in that day's game.
Exactly.
And basically bases your choices. Much like, let's say, a game like Russian roulette, where you pick your number, you're picking your players here. And if you're right, you're being rewarded with actual currency, which is why Google took it off.
Okay.
Right. Now, in similar context, there are multiple other apps. Like, for example, if you look at this year's IPL title sponsor, Dream 11.
Dream 11, exactly.
Right. Even they are into this business of this, player matchmaking and selection and gambling and whatnot.
But are they on the App Store?
That's the thing, they are not.
Exactly.
See, Apple is a different thing. They allow it on their Apple App Store due to their own policies, but Google does not allow it. And it's not like, Google just said, Paytm, get out. If you look at the reports and all that are coming out on this particular news story, the Google dev team explicitly reached out to Paytm multiple times.
So the due diligence with regards to this was well followed.
Yes.
It's not coming out of nowhere.
Correct. It is not a very abrupt action on the part of Google. They had followed up with the Paytm team several times, and after they got no response, that is when Google took that step. And to when Paytm came back on the Google Play Store, like 7-8 hours later, as I was mentioning, that feature or that mini game rather was taken off, and it was back on the Play Store again. Now, why do you think that, Paytm, although it had received this intimation from Google, still chose to ignore it and, still go ahead with it? Now, there's this angle that Google and Apple being the dominant players and, you should not mess with them.
Antitrust issue.
Correct. That's there. Exactly. That's a whole other topic for a different day. But personally, don't you think Paytm on its end could have dealt with this better, much like Dream 11 does?
They could have just taken it off that particular part of the app could have been promoted differently through their website.
Correct. Paytm has its own website.
Through the App Store per se, like the Apple App Store per se.
Correct.
There they weren't taken off. So, policy guidelines are there for a reason, and companies, they put it there. And if Google has followed the due diligence to actually intimate them, and as you are saying that they have intimated them quite too many times.
Correct.
So it's not very unreasonable for the app to suddenly disappear, and it's definitely not something that sheds light on the antitrust angle.
Correct. So people who are going hue and cry about Paytm, and there are reports where I saw even, people were claiming on social media and other platforms that, Paytm's now been taken off because it's backed by a Chinese company.
Yeah.
See, that is an angle, but that's not the angle, or that is not the focus that we are looking at, because that is definitely not the reason, because there are loads of Indian companies that have Chinese backings and they're still there.
Absolutely.
That is not the reason. Clear and simple.
Like this entire hatred that has
I know.
is going around, and especially
and this hatred is in the name of patriotism.
That is scary. That's almost scary. So we can per se say that the advice that you are providing at this point of time, or rather suggestion to Paytm, would be they take off that part of the app, and if they want to include that in their app, they can do it through the website or the app store for that matter.
Absolutely. So that would be my suggestion to Paytm. Keep the game. If you want to do it, keep the game. I am pretty sure Paytm has its own backings and sponsorships associated with it, right? Keep the game. Keep it on the website. If you want to have a unified fair platform, or if you're okay with it, keep it on the Apple App Store where it is allowed and on the website.
Exactly.
Google does not allow it, don't. Just don't. Right?
So moving on from what we started talking about, that is the very anti-China propaganda, or rather feeling, is like predominant in the world right now. So that kind of, I want to progress into whether it's justified, whether it's not justified. I don't want to talk about that. But however, a very interesting piece of news that I am well aware of, and I'm sure you are too, is the Zhenhua data leak.
Yeah. So about the Zhenhua data leak. So, it's a very critical topic that I wanted to touch upon today as well. And thank you for bringing it up. So the Zhenhua data leak that has been going around, right? It's a very nuanced topic, I say, because very few people know about it. I'm not sure why. But for people who are joining us on audio and also on video, let us, since you are also a little bit aware about it, I'm sure, let us educate them about what it is and, why they should be taking it very seriously. Now, to start off, let me give you a brief background, and I'm sure you will know about this, and feel free to jump in, whenever you have more points to add, like you do. So, stating the background of Zenhua. So, Zenhua, or basically the Shenzhen Zhenhua Data Information Technology Company, that was founded by this person called Wang Zhufang, who is basically one of the ex-IBM employees, right? So, it is a company that is based out of Shenzhen, and basically they are a company that profiles individuals. Now, profiling, for those of you who would not be knowing, is essentially collecting data that is in relation to your physical being. It could be your name, your address, your sexual orientation, your age, your financial details, everything.
So is it in the same format as what we saw with Cambridge Analytica?
Yes. So when Cambridge Analytica was specific to the data in relation to influencing your voting decisions, this sort of thing is where it is collecting data about you to build a profile about what you are as a human being, as an individual, right? Now, what makes this Zhenhua data leak very much critical is that this was data that was accidentally leaked, right, to an American, which consisted of data what Zenhua calls the Overseas Key Information Persons Database.
That's scary.
Yeah, it's a big name also.
That's scary.
But so that database, essentially, the part of it that was leaked contained data of about 250,000, or for Indian viewers, 2.5 lakh individuals, out of which a little over 10,000 of them are about Indian citizens.
And if I'm aware, Amit Shah and Mr. Modi, our Prime Minister, happens to be on that list.
Correct.
That makes it even more scary. As to why these people are being profiled.
Absolutely. And also bigger names in the industry side and the sports side, like Ratan Tata, Sachin Tendulkar, even their data was profiled by Zenhua. Now, Zenhua officially had claimed that, they use data that is publicly available. Right, but basis the analytics and the research that has been done on the data that has been acquired, so there's this Australian company called Internet 2.0, which it's a cybersecurity firm which has basically looked into the data that was leaked, and they found out that a portion of the data that is there from the Zenhua leak, right, consists of data that is not publicly available.
So how are they collecting this data?
That's the thing. Zenhua is claiming, Zenhua, they are claiming that it's all publicly available data, but for some people, around 20% or so, they are not even there on the online sphere. How do you have their data?
Establish control. That's what China is trying to do.
And see, even on that China angle, China is being China. So they are like, we do not have any role associated with Zenhua and everything and all.
Like they don't have with COVID and
correct. They don't have any links or anything, whatever. They basically washed their hands of this, right? But
sanitized it.
Correct. Go COVID. So coming back, essentially, why it makes it very scary is of the 10,000 plus Indians that is there, and this is, mind you, this is only 250,000 of the entire data. So this is only a quarter of that entire data, could be more.
That was leaked,
right?
We don't know how much data they have actually
collected. And in between that 250,000 or 250,000 rather, 10,000 plus Indians. Now, publicly, we know of a handful of names that has been there, and it could be there that, people like you and me could be there, people like anybody could be there.
Yeah.
Right? And if you are using data that is not publicly available to me, you are spying on me.
Exactly.
Correct. So
that's surveillance. That's
correct.
Surveillance.
Correct. So if some kind of thing like the Zenhua happens to Indians, or rather, let's say the Zenhua data leak, it affects Indians by and large, right? So let's look at this angle. That why is it so important?
Before I harp on the importance of this, I would like you to continue on the point which you started off with as to what happens if the same thing happens in India. What is the recourse, say from the legal side, that a person has sitting in India if he or she is aware of the fact or such thing has happened and the government has to inform us as to that our data is not private to us anymore. So what is the recourse in that?
So allegedly, India does not do this. Now, when I say do this, by that I mean companies like Zenhua in existence. Because, for China to even have a company which is allowed to profile, right, not only its citizens but also people globally, right? And their CEO, Wang, so he has essentially also at multiple times in the recent past declared a hybrid warfare.
Exactly.
Or let's say a psychological warfare, right? So for China to still enable that company by letting it to exist,
very antithetical to sovereign policies and
correct. So coming to India in general, I don't think such a company would be allowed to exist in India. But if it did, there are multiple recourses, though very weak in comparison to the data privacy bill which is there in the parliament, which allows a much more wider gamut of protection.
Which is more like the European Union.
Correct. So for now, what we have in the Indian context is that if such an incident happens, that company needs to intimate to the government CERT about such a leak happening, and then it needs to inform the users who are affected with the leak to accordingly either modify their existing data or withdraw the service or whatsoever, right? But the data protection bill has a series of other mechanisms and protections as well. One of which you will also appreciate, and this we had lightly touched upon in our last episode.
Segregation of data.
Correct. So for Indian citizens, their data needs to be within India. So we had lightly touched upon it, and this is a beautiful thing to have because it essentially guarantees that your data, being an Indian citizen, never leaves the country.
So localization of data.
Correct. So that is an angle which you would know in a way protected the Indian citizens because it's within the territory of India and in a way controlled within the control of the Indian government. There are also other additional, advantages, let's say, of the bill, which allows you to withdraw your consent, modify your consent, to have the concept of an informed consent, where I'm informing you well in advance, and you would see that certain apps like WhatsApp, Facebook, and all inform you that your data is being collected, right? So for China to go the exact opposite direction and tell you, or rather tell a company that start profiling these people from tomorrow, that is where I'm trying to harp upon. That should not be allowed. And that is why this leak is that much important and it needs to be appreciated to the larger masses, right?
Yeah. So carrying forward from what you asked me as to why this is important. Now we are in the 21st century, right? And in our century, the most important commodity per se, I believe, and the commodity and the trade of the future is on the very basis of data. So when we talk about, say, even for simple, a marketing analytical tool, which is collecting your data, you can see that it's very simple. A lot of you have realized that when you type something in Google, it comes as an advertisement, maybe when you're going on Facebook or Insta or something of that sort. Now that happening, there's a limit to that, right? So there's a limit to where I believe my data can be used, and then beyond which would be critical personal data and the segregation that has happened with the data protection bill in 2019.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
So that segregation I believe is very important. Why? Because simply today, let's take up an example. I'm wearing a wearable and I'm watching say TV series or a propaganda message that is come up on TV. My heart rate flickers, right? That data is being collected. Tomorrow,
listening to you, mine is already flickering.
Okay, yours is. God, you're wearing one?
Yeah.
God. Okay, don't. They're collecting data. You know it now. So essentially, when I am watching a propaganda and say I don't like it, I disagree with it. So obviously, this can read that. Right.
Absolutely.
So that data is very instrumental. Now that is health data.
Absolutely. So it's so the point that you're trying to make is by my, let's say, fluctuations in the heartbeat or whatever.
Exactly.
You are able to deduce how I am reacting without consciously reacting.
Exactly. So whether or not I am for or against a propaganda is very clear at that point. So that itself can be used to mold our perceptions. And this is something that has been worked on, and a lot of conspiracy theories have come up and gone away, but there's still that one thing that sticks. That today, at this point of time, the way marketing or like something even Chomsky kind of harped upon in his book Manufacturing Consent, that we essentially are losing track of our choices. We are made to think that we do have a free choice, we do have a free will to choose. However, what we are being fed as to know, you have these 4 options in our head. It's being created in a very, very niche manner, in a very regular manner.
If I give you a very real example of this, and this is for all those who are tuning in on video and audio, look up something on Google, something that you want to buy. I will personally assure you that for the next few hours, you will see ads running on that particular product or commodity that you're searching for. Wherever you go, be it on Amazon, be it on Facebook, be it anywhere, and that will keep on following you wherever you are going through, right? And this is why I want to impress upon you, the data protection bill needs to pass.
Not only that, I also think that our country, and not only our country, the world and individuals in this world needs to realize the importance of data and how much they are actually letting out, how much they are comfortable with to let out and be known out there, and what should be kept to be very private, like the health data part. A lot of these companies, you might have seen that they've come up like teleconsultancy and everything have come up. So we can take that up in the next episode as
Absolutely.
to what the legalities might be with regards to health data and how that can influence choices per se.
Definitely, we can cover it in a future episode. But yeah, right now we are in consensus that this Zhenhua data leak is something that needs wide and mass appreciation, and this data protection bill very much needs to be passed.
Very important.
And with that, we are done with the second episode of Coffee Time Gyan. Thank you for joining us. Hey, hope you enjoyed that episode of Coffee Time Gyan. Feel free to like, share and subscribe if you like the video that we've been putting up, and also comment down below if you have any questions or if you would want us to cover something else. And with that, anything else you want to add, Aditya?
Oh, thank you.
Well done. Thank you for joining us.